All right. Very good. So we are recording. I hope everybody's okay with that. Spotlight John there. So it's a great honor to have John join us. And, we've got obviously the group here in Cape Town. We just came off the Lean Coffee group. So if you're not part of that, we'd love to plug you in. So WhatsApp group and otherwise, we do meet up monthly and have some good roundtable discussions. So we're all energized for the webinar here, John. I had the honor to meet John a couple of years ago, and John will tell you, based over in Denmark, had a great career starting off, a couple of nice companies, but LIA, I would say, John, is where I had most of your initial experience with TWI. So training within industry, it was a framework that was born out of World War II. The Americans, God bless us, we put it into play because we needed to train our workforce the most efficient, effective manner, and it was primarily women at the time. And it was how do we equip them with the skills and instruction and methods to do the work to support the war effort. And it was so effective, it trained millions of people over a very short time frame. It was so effective that the industrialists after World War II said, well, let's keep this thing going. And they put it into play in other parts of the globe, in Europe, Japan, likewise. There are pockets in South America, maybe not so much in Africa, but hopefully we'll change that here. And Australia is also a hub of TWI. So it had an initial life, and a lot of what you'll see now with Toyota and Lean and those principles was really born out of it. And you might not hear it called explicitly TWI by them, but they will not argue at all that TWI is the origin of standardized work, the improvement that they look at. So that's near and dear to their hearts. My father worked at Toyota Kentucky, and he said 70% of their initial training framework was TWI derived for them training up the new Americans. So it kind of went out of vogue for a while there. And I think at the late 1990s, early 2000s, TWI had a rebirth along with some of the Lean momentum. A couple of researchers saw it, realized how foundational of a piece it was. And I think, John, you were very fortunate because your career was kicking off at that time, and you were able to deploy TWI for the LEGO group globally and really support them on how do they bring that on board. And then I think the project that picked my ears up and caused me to reach out to John was they were working with many different port terminals globally. So APM terminals, the Maersk group, and had about 30 of those going, training them on these templates. And then likewise, many other global organizations. So we had John down, join the Lean Summit here in Cape Town in November of last year, along with his partner Katrina is also on. Glad to have both of you. And it's just awesome to see it now starting to take hold. So very excited to have our first basic training for job instruction, which John's going to touch on momentarily. We're going to host that live in person here in Cape Town in about 2.5 weeks. And Green Thread Manufacturers, who makes poetry and old khaki, they're going to be hosting that at their facility. So it is open to the public at this point. It might become closed door, but if we get enough interest from outside, we can hopefully have a couple of external participants join that. And that's really going to be the initial training that John's going to be obviously leading. I'll be helping facilitate it. And then the hope is to keep carrying that forward here locally. So I've said a lot, John, but feel free to close any gaps there with my intro to your background. And then we'd love to hear from you with your presentation. And we'll save some good time at the end for question and answer.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for that very nice introduction here. And I have a small hope here that the brave ones would like to turn on their camera so I can see you. So I don't feel I'm talking to a wall. So I don't know that if that's part of the culture here, or but the ones who are brave enough, if you would like to kind of turn on your camera so I can see the faces and have more a dialogue with you. Because I'm hoping to have a dialogue here, not so much just only presentation. Would that be okay?
We'll see.
We'll see. For the brave ones, right? For the brave ones. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see the presentation, and I'll just dive into the presentation mode. Can you see the presentation?
We can, and we can hear you loud and clear.
Cool. So this is going to be kind of a basic introduction to kind of job instruction and job relations. We're going to kick off with a little bit why we're doing it, the history, and then going into the programs. And just if there are any questions at all along the way, raise your hand or poke me, and we'll take the dialogue. So I always love to get good questions in here. So what a Schengen analysis actually said some years ago, that 85% of Lean implementations fail. So why is that? Why do we not succeed with our Lean journey? Why are we falling behind? Why are we dropping off again? So the 85% is looked after 5 years. Then most people get started and then they slowly drop off. So 85% of that drop off after 5 years. And their analysis said when standard work isn't standardized, meaning our behaviors, our actions every day, whatever we do in our standard work, lean and standard work and work on the line. When our words and standard don't match with our behaviors of leaders and employees, right? And our behaviors are what we do every day. That's our behaviors, right? So how do we turn our standards into our behaviors? And that's where TWI comes in. So TWI was introduced in 1940s, like you said, Ben, here during Second World War, to help improve manufacturing food, weapons, everything that was needed to help the war. And the mission of the TWI service at that time was to help industry to help itself to get out more materials than ever been possible with a consistent accelerating speed. So that was the thinking behind there. And all the programs were developed upon that. And there are 3 programs: job instruction, job relation, job method. And everything was meant to help industry help itself. So they're based on basic trainings and training. It's always handing over the programs to the industry. Like I said, Ben, it was spread out after the war, and some of the countries that was implemented in was Japan. And Japan took on TWI in 48, together with Deming's PDCA cycles and some other basic tools. And many industries was trained in Japan in the TWI programs. In 51, Toyota started using TWI, starting with job relation, then job instruction, and job method later on, and today are seen as cornerstones of their TPS system. But it was kind of hidden, a secret almost, you can say, the secret source of lean. Because when the lean people came, or the professors came to Japan describing lean in the 80s, they were describing the tools, what they could see. And later in 2000, they could actually start to, okay, we're missing something. And then they went back and discovered again, there was something behind it where we talk about lean leadership, lean culture, and stuff like that. And that's where TWI was reintroduced again, both to US, but also to Europe later. So in the US, it came back in 2001. And in Europe, it came around 2009. And in 2010-11, we started up at LEGO using TWI. And the reason why we did that, because we had a problem. We needed to train up people, we needed to do global knowledge sharing, and ramp up our manufacturing faster. So that was kind of the reason why we picked up TWI. So the case we did at LEGO was over 3 years, we built that up. And over the last 12 years, it still continued to grow and expanded the group within manufacturing. So what we did back there in that case was we worked on how do we find the good trainers to train? How do we develop those trainers? How do we evaluate the trainers? How do we enable that global knowledge sharing using TWI modules? And here specific job instruction, where the breakdown sheet is kind of the key of doing global knowledge sharing. I'll get that back to a little bit later on what is a breakdown sheet. Then we ran a global pilot project, started small with a changeover process in molding, which is also described in the book, how we prepared that, how we executed that, and also the current state and kind of what we achieved with that. From there, that pilot project in that year, we expanded to 300 trainers the next year, rolling it out. So that's kind of the process we did at LEGO with TWI. So since TWI, or since I worked with TWI at LEGO, which is now, I guess, almost 13 years ago now, BTP has been working globally on implementing TWI with many different companies. And like you mentioned here, some of the companies, Ben, and I just picked 4 cases here, I'll go through here. So one of the companies, or one of the cases we did was a parcel logistics, companies called PostNord in Denmark, and they handle all our packages more or less. So one of the jobs there is that you stand on the parcel line, it's coming down the parcels, you pick the parcels, you check the code, and put it into the right container. So how you place the parcel in the container has a huge impact on how much air you transfer or transport. If you put it down crooked or the way you put it down. So here we talked about a key point in one job breakdown. And we discussed that with a lot of people, both the trainers and the leaders and also some of the employees. What do we call that? So we call that like building with bricks on a wall. Should it be like Tetris, the game, where you're always looking at how to put down things? Or was it building with Legos? And this conversation about the key point, how to do it, actually improved less air in the space with 10%. And annually that is 1.1 million euro. Just that one key point, that one breakdown we trained the people in. So it has a small job, but it's a huge impact. I think that's a very good test on when you could do training, you can also get good results. Another example is from a bank, a very different process. This is a process about loan process or loan application. And part of that job learning that in the past took 15 days. But breaking that down into a good structure, training that more efficient, we get down to 3 days onboarding, but more stable production. Another job was from the wind turbine industry. And one of the global areas you get mistakes in there or the quality lists, that's bolt tightening. It sounds like a simple job. And that's actually my learning looking at quality lists or mistake lists is that most jobs that we do mistakes on are actually the basic job, the simple jobs. So here we trained 250 people in bolt tightening and we improved the process with 60%, which is a pretty good quality improvement on the process. Safety is also important. So in one of the terminals or harbors, you can say, we did a safety training on how to do lashing on the container. And before we did this training, there were maybe weekly or bi-weekly smaller accidents on this. After we did the training with everybody, there were 0 accidents for 6 months, the period we followed the project in. So going for almost weekly incidents to 0 with just one training, I think that's a pretty good proof of concept also. So the TWI programs in B2P, we trained more than 2,500 individuals around the world. We delivered this in 5 continents so far. So we already mentioned this, Ben, the statement from Maersk. And we work with their terminals in 29 locations and can truly say that it works globally. It works in all the countries we've been into now. So what are the programs? There are 3 programs. The job relations program is kind of teaches how to develop and maintain good relations and prevent people problems from happening and how to effectively resolve conflicts that arise. So this is the leadership program that are in job relations. The second program is job instruction, and this teaches how to effectively train people to do a job safely, correctly, and consensuously. Job method is the third program. This teaches how to continuously improve the way jobs are done. So there are 3 basic programs. There's a red line with all the programs. They're very similar build-up. So each program follows 4 steps, just like the PDCA. And there's always a cycle in here, learning process that's circular. Each method, when it's trained, is very basic language, short for terms. Each training is small groups, 6 to 10 people. When we practice it, there's very little theory, but a lot of practice. So each person coming to the training needs to practice the method. So in job relations, they bring a case, a people-person case, where we practice on achieving fellowship. On job instruction, they bring a job that we can teach. On job method, they bring a process that we want to improve. So everything is very practical, hands-on. All the programs are divided into basic training and trainer-trainer, and there's also an optional facilitator training on it also, learning to do that. Every program is standardized. There's no PowerPoints. Everything is with manuals and participant guides and small pocket cards. So everything is very low-key practical. And so far we have our materials, I think, in 16 to 20 languages, depending on program.
We're passing around the one job instruction manual here, basic training, John, in the room. And I think what said to me initially, just to jump in, I really love your Danish design style. I think it might come from your Lego days too, because it is so easily understood, well laid out. So that's also what really amazed me when I first saw it.
We put a lot of effort into it to improve the learning in the process here. So one of the things is we'll learn by hand. When you write, you learn with the hand. When you repeat things, it's also a training skill, and also the reflections putting into it. So every session we actually close down with what have I learned today to reflect on the learning process. Where am I in that? So a lot of that is enhancing the learning process. So thank you for mentioning that, Ben. Yeah. So let's go a little bit deeper into job relation. So Ole here is one of our clients from Grundfos. He's a plant director. And Ole is a mature company in the lean journey when they took in job relations. And I really like the first line here in his statement here, is that job relation is the very source that holds PDCA circle in place, the people part of it, the people want to do the job. So job relations is about engagement, motivation, so people want to follow our instructions and want to do the job. So that's kind of the key here. So often when we work with companies, we hear these problems coming out, and this is where job relations can kind of help that. The first one is, why do people not cooperate with me? It could be that we're implementing something and I'm asking my people for help, but they look away. They're not engaging, they're not moving towards me. Some people call that resistance or defense. Why don't people want to use our safety equipments? Why do people resist our quality standards? Why do people have a hard time accepting change? And I think that's the last one is kind of the most saying one for me. Why do people resign or resign and stay? Meaning they do the work, but they're demotivated. So if you can relate to these questions, the job relations training will help you improve this. So when we meet problems or conflicts, there are 4 levels here we can meet them on. And in job relations, we learn these 4 levels, where the 2 first ones are the more proactive ones, and the last 2 are more reactive. The first one called sizing up before it happens. Sizing up before it happens. Here I can anticipate a problem. Let's say we are implementing a new process, and I can size up that maybe some people will not like the new process. Then I can do 2 options. I can either try to handle that process with care, or I can drop it. Right? Just go out and do it. The second level is being tipped off, Here I'm getting a tip. It could be I'm moving ahead with the process, the new process for production, and I can sense people don't like it. They look away, they stop talking. I get signals from the body language. The third level is called coming to you. Now people are saying it out loud. It could be somebody coming to me and saying, maybe they will not like the new process. Maybe they like the old way better, or whatever they're saying to me, it's coming to me. Again, I can choose to handle it or choose to ignore the signal. The last one is I'm going through production and I'm seeing somebody still doing the old process and not the new one we just implemented. Meaning I'm running into the problem. So running into the problem is the last one. So this is how we see problems are escalating on all levels, where the first 2 ones are more proactive, where I'm more easy, can think about what to do. And the last one, if I see somebody breaking the rules, I need to act on it, right? So I don't know where you would like to work, but I know for sure I would like to work on level 1 and 2, where it's sizing up and being tipped off. But we do see when people bring cases to the training in the beginning, it's mostly running into. That's where people are in the beginning. And then with time, we work with the job relations, then move slowly towards more the first 2 ones, which of course is a good learning process getting there. Yeah. So getting down to the bits and bytes of job relations, there are a pocket card in job relations. I'm wearing it here, where there's 2 sides of it. The first side is kind of a proactive side, where we call them the job relations foundations, or foundations for good relations. The first foundation is tell people how they are performing. So imagine I've been working at a new company for a month, and I meet my good friend in the supermarket. And my friend asks me, how's it going at the new company? And I say, I don't know. Nobody's telling me if I'm doing good or bad. So if that's kind of the case, how do I then think the motivation is? Is that going up or down if I don't know if I'm performing or not performing at my new job? The second foundation is called give credit when due. And giving credit when due doesn't mean the yearly interview or dialogue. It means the daily work. So let's say I have a worker I've asked to do some extra work with. It could be maybe 1 hour overtime or some other extra jobs. But the supervisor, I forget to say thank you. So how many times can I ask for something extra and forgetting saying thank you before they lose their motivation or don't want to help me? So that's again about the relationship here in the daily work. The third one is called tell people in advance about changes. And of course, the change that affects them. So if we don't prep people for change, it's going to be more hard to go through the change process. There's always going to be a change process, but of course, we need to help them through the change and tell them why. Number 4 foundation here is make best use of each person's ability. So we say here, don't stand in the way of your people. Enable them, lift them. And that's kind of also, if you work with lean, the 7 waste, we know them from the past, and some people now talk about 8 waste, the abilities of our people, utilizing our people's abilities fully.
John, can I interrupt briefly here too? So with these cards, because I think some are very new to TWI and are not familiar with the cards, because these have been around since the very beginning. So this isn't something that you put together that looks nice on a page. It really was what the Department of War back in 1940, whatever, put on the page to say, here are the principles that we would like to share with our workforce to make sure that people are thinking consistently, looking at it the same way. If we're following this approach, then we expect we'll get a good outcome from this. So it's across all of the different programs. You'll see this, that they each have a card with a specific color that if you're wearing it as a supervisor, you can pull it up and have a quick reference. But the one part is, let's have a very clear view of the principles and trust that they work, and let's follow those and make sure that everybody's on the same page with why that's the way we do it.
So the job relations program was actually developed with, all the programs were developed with companies and universities. And here on the job relations card, Harvard University was part of that development. So the job relations card and method here was tested 11 times. Fully manual, scripted out, and the whole process here. So everything was tested out here. So in the beginning, they had like 4 foundations and 5 foundations. Now they hit the 4. And I really think that that's kind of the valid test here over it. And TWI was trained to 1.7 million supervisors during Second World War. So it was really thoroughly tested at that time. That's also why we don't change it right now, because the method is pretty solid, I would say. The only thing we've done is we changed a few words here and there to make sure it's kind of the modern language. It's not the old-fashioned language. That's actually the only thing we've done. So the 4 foundation is kind of the proactive work I can do every day as a supervisor. But if I don't do that and I run into kind of frictions, the problems, then we have the other side on it, which are kind of the 4 steps. How do I then handle a problem? Of course, first I need to determine the problem. Then I make the objective. Then there are 4 simple steps here. Get the facts, weigh and decide my solutions, take action, and check results. And that's my PDCA on people problems. Here, when we work on the problem side in the beginning, determine the problem and then the objective, we always look at it balanced, which means there is a business side of it and there is a relation side of it. If I remove one of them, if I only look at the relationship, want to do good leadership, we don't hit the business, improve the business, right? But if I only look at the business, I need the persons to do X, Y, Z at this time, the correct way. But I forget the people part. I get a bad relationship line and the performance will go down. So here we're talking about we get results through people as a supervisor. So I need to get these results and improve my relationship at the same time. And that gives them some different actions. And that also makes sure that I think different when I look at the current state of getting the facts. That's kind of the method we're talking about here, the foundations and the 4 steps. How we then practice it every day is that we actually use it every day, like we talked about, the foundations. But also we have a program or a session we call the learning sharing session, where the leaders facilitate their leaders in this process, meaning a leader brings in a problem or a case which they talk about. So this session is a 1-hour session between the leader's leader and their leaders, where we practice this. The way we roll out job relations, very practical, is layer by layer, which means we start with the site management team, They go through basic training, they practice the method. Then we train the next level in basic training. And at the same time, the senior management team goes through a facilitator training. So they learn to facilitate the next level. So they kind of are a practitioner level and a facilitator level. After that, we hand it over to the company by doing a trainer-trainer. And then from there, they cascade it slowly, step by step, down in the organization with basic training and facilitator training, making sure that all the levels kind of have this idea of how to do leadership. This is more a culture change than anything else. So the way we measure culture is how we take decisions. And in the 4-step method, when you zoom in on that, in kind of the way of the side, we evaluate, should I get more facts or take action? And right there, that's what's happening in our culture, right? If I go out with too few facts, I can maybe create a bigger problem. If I wait too long time, they can create a different problem. So this is all about how we take action in the organization as leaders on all levels. So this is an app development company called TWI in Denmark. They say they see this as a good investment in practicing the relationship muscle. So how do we practice this every day, this relationship muscle? Think about how do I get faster and better results through my people? And this is kind of a quote from them looking at that. Another program is called the Job Instruction Program, and this is how you teach people. So looking at what we see normally happening and going on in organization is that training is inefficient, which means it gives inefficient and various results. There's variation in the results, which turns into firefighting, which turns into no time for training. And that's a negative circle going down. What I rather would do is kind of define the critical skill, transfer the critical skill, do structured follow-up, which leads to stable results and engagement. Because now people know what's expected of them, and they can actually do it. And I've seen this happen very many times in very practical cases. So the questions we often get in the same way as job relations, but different questions. So how do we knowledge transfer more effectively? So one of the things we've heard from one of the companies is we lose our employees because it takes too long time to onboard, or onboarding is not effective, which means they learn by doing, making mistakes, or getting injured, right? Another one we hear is, why do people not trained in our safety equipment? How can we reduce our number of human errors? Why don't we succeed with our standardized work? How to ensure new hires feel skilled and valued fast? So these are basic questions or problems we help with in job instruction. So the first step is to kind of list down what is the critical knowledge and skills, and who do we need to train, so make a training timetable. Many people know this as the skills matrix or versatility charts. It has many different names, but I actually started here with a training timetable. What we teach when we teach the TWI programs is the basic tool here. But we're also teaching the questions you need to ask when you work with it. And this is a very proactive tool if it's used correctly. So if I look, let's say 3 months ahead as a supervisor, what are the gaps and challenges with my team? Is somebody going on vacation? Is somebody being pregnant? Somebody going on pension? Whatever happens to the team, and is somebody not performing right? So this is the team point of view, which is the low X. Then we have the other one, change in production process. I'm looking ahead 3 months. Are there coming in new standards? Are we getting in new equipment? Are we getting in any volume changes? So I need to get on board more people in different processes. So everything going on here, of course, is a training opportunity. So I need to train my people so we have enough people that's trained to fit to this.
John, one example I'll give on this, what brought it to life for me.
Yeah.
I think I was on the call with you, and I was with the U.S. Navy actually, and they had a specialized team, or have a specialized team that do repairs on aircraft carriers. There's only one team in the world right now that's capable of doing these certain repairs. And they said, we want to use job instruction because this is the problem we need to solve. We don't have enough people across the top of that page to be able to do the work down those rows.
Yeah.
And we need to use job instruction to make sure people are following the tasks, doing it in a uniform, consistent way. And because they had a backlog of aircraft carrier repairs, got to get them back out to the water. So like that was a very practical example of why this is useful. So I'm sure similar examples in your environments too.
And I'll also say when I go to shop floor many places, I definitely see if there is a chart like this, that there is a missing link between the KPIs and what I see here. Because many times the frontline leaders actually give a check mark here, or a number 4 or number 5 or a star, whatever you use, to people who's not following standard, meaning they cannot do the work in takt time. They're not following the safety standard. They're not following the quality standard. And if they're not following it, it cannot be done correctly. So then it's not a check mark. So there are many gaps here, and you can say ways to improve our work just by looking at this tool here. It's a very strategic tool, definitely. So going into job instruction, we see here actually the tools we have here. There's also a card here. There's a preparation side, how to get ready to instruct. And of course, we need to make a training timetable because training should not happen by accident. What happens to the new employee coming in and we don't have a training plan for them? They get demotivated. What happens to instructor who has to train the person coming in if you don't have a plan? Then you cannot prepare for it. It maybe happens by accident. What about the leader? They can also not plan for their resources, which means they cannot, moving up an organization, talk about resources to get more resources or plan resources in relation to that. That's the first step. Second step is to break down the job, and I'll get back to that a little bit later. Third step is get everything ready and arrange the work site. Then I'm ready to instruct. Once I'm ready to instruct, I turn the card over, and then I have my 4 steps, the 4-step method of instructing. The first step is to prepare the person. Second step, present the job. Third step, try out. I need to see them do the work. And fourth step is check results. And this is my PDCA on how to do good skills training. The last 2 lines I think is very important here because that's the whole mantra of job instruction. If the person hasn't learned, the instructor hasn't taught, which means the instructor doesn't leave the worker until they can perform the job. Which means takt time, safety, quality, everything has to be in place. Because first then they can actually do the job.
John, can you give a quick example on that? So if I'm training somebody using these 4 steps, what would be a timeline if I'm going off and I've got a specific piece of work? How long do you think it would take me to follow this and leave that person autonomous to do it?
That's a good question. It always depends on the job, right? And what we say here in job instruction is we want to do small jobs, not long jobs. So let's say you have a changeover process, you want to train that. Just like a dance, you want to divide that into smaller steps. And we do the same for job instruction. So you learn one part of that changeover process. Once you can do that, you move on and move on and move on. So this is kind of the section by section learning process or step by step. So the small jobs, let's say a job takes maybe 1 minute. That could maybe transfer into 10 minutes training. So this is skills training, just like you do skydiving training or scuba diving training. It's kind of instructor-led. It's not knowledge training, it's skills training. So if you go through the 4 steps here, you can say the first one is to prepare the person so they want to learn the job, which means they need to know the job name, what it is, the job, concrete. You need to find out what they already know about the job and the process or something similar. You need to explain what happens if they don't do it correctly, meaning motivating the person, making sure they stand in the right location. So that's kind of the first part of it, and making sure they're ready to learn. Step 2, you show the job 3 times. First time important step, then key points, and then reasons, which means what they do, how they do it, and why we do it that way. So now I've seen it 3 times. Then I hand it over to the person. First time they do it, first time without saying anything. I help them through the process, correct errors. Second time, they tell important steps, what they do. Third time, the key points, how they do it. And number 4, why they do it that way. Which means now I'm full control. I know exactly that they can do the job. They can explain what they do, how they do it, and why they do it that way, meaning the consequences. If they need more practice while I'm there, I'm staying there and coaching them. Some people maybe need to do it 5, 6, 7 times before we know they can do it. Then we move on to the next one, that's follow-up. Here I need to tell them, put them on their own. They can do the job now, maybe not 100% in takt time, depending on the level. But with practice, they can do it. But of course, they can do it 100% safely and 100% according to quality. That's kind of the minimum demand. Then we let them know who they can help. We let them know when we're back. I let them know that I will follow you maybe for a week. And after that week, the leader will come and do process confirmation to check on my training to make sure that I've done a good training. And by that time, they need to be able to follow within tag time. So you can say there's kind of a level of being in training. The person is doing the work with coaching or with support. And then after the process confirmation, they can do it on their own. Does that make sense? Or
Definitely. And I was just going to say, I think one thing we've all struggled with, or maybe said ourselves, is, oh, we've trained that person. Especially when we're doing problem solving and we get to it and we didn't follow the process, like, oh, well, we trained them. Well, do we have a standard for how we train? And most times is no. And I'm obviously guilty of it as well. But what I love is that they were solving that problem initially. They say, we need a clear standard to train several million people to train in the same way, because then we have a shared standard that we can then define. Did we follow our standard of how we do training? Yes or no? Because if we didn't, then we obviously know that's a problem. But that's what I love about it. It just simplifies it to say, this is the best practice training method that you can follow, that you can actually verify and say, if you train somebody in this way and there's still a problem, that causes you to look more deeply at the process versus blaming the training for being the reason why.
Yeah. As soon as you have a process for training, you can also always improve the process, right? It's about process improvement, not blaming the person in this sense. So correctly. So I don't know, because I didn't share that before, but I actually been a rowing coach for many years and also a national coach in rowing. And that was before I started at LEGO. I've also been a sergeant in the Army. So I worked with training more or less since I was 16 before I worked at LEGO. And I must say, what I see in job instruction is a combination of all that. So in the sports world, if you learn how to do a squat or anything you learn in sport, right, you want to show it the correct way. You want to explain what you do and how you do it. And then you also explain the consequence of not doing it correctly. So you can use example of a squat where you have weights on the shoulder and you go down. And one of the key points in doing a squat is that you need to have core tension. If you don't have core tension, you can get a back injury. So the same principles I've learned in the sports world, but also learned in the Army, is 100% the same principles we're using here in job instruction. And I must say, once I saw that, I was just hooked on it and loved it. And I've been teaching it ever since that. And I must say, all around the world, as soon as people get structure on how they do training, training just improves. And the people doing the training, most of them, they also have a very good career afterwards. So I've many people around the world who have gone through the TWI training as an employee, becoming team leaders and managers around. So that's been pretty exciting to see that with these simple tools, you can actually grow people, I would say. Yeah. It looks simple, but it has a huge effect. So this is the breakdown sheet when we do the training. It's like notes for a wedding. I'm not going to go in on how telling alone, showing alone today, because we don't have time for that. But this is how we structure it. The first, when we teach it or show it, we do the important steps, then the key points and the reasons, and they're built in a very logical way. It's not a lot of words. It's like speaking notes for a wedding to have in mind for the trainer so they can structure their training, which makes it super effective because we're not saying a lot of work things here. It's very practical, very practical. Opposite to job relations, job instruction is rolled out in a different way. We still start with the site management team. And the reason we do that is that they learn the method, but they also learn what decisions to take. So they actually design the system that can support the job instruction methods. Then we do a pilot, like a slice of a cake, all the way into the organization, where we teach middle leaders and the front line and conduct a real pilot on the front line, where we train concrete jobs, just like the parcel or the wind turbine or the bank, process improvement, right? But we also test the system, meaning the leader's role, the leader's role, and the management team's role, which means once we have done with the pilot over 6 months, we can then cascade all the way through the organization. But that's not us, that's you doing it, because now we've done a trainer, and then you will continue doing all those trainings. That's how we hand it over. And that goes back to the thinking from 1940 to help industry help itself. So that's kind of, we want to enable you in that process there. That's through our global certification process. Yeah. So we did some work with a medical company also globally. And one of the things we worked on there is line clearance. And that seems like a simple job. But again, it goes back to that, what is my behavior when I do the job? So in job instruction, we learn how to do the job, of course, but we also learn the discipline and the behavior on what happens if we don't do it correctly. And when we get that attention on it, when we put light on that, we get much better quality out of it. So we know by fact that humans unlearn. So when we build a learning system or people system, we need to think about that. If we know by fact that people unlearn, so let's say you start to make mistakes, you get trained, and then after 3 months, we see people lose down on the quality again. So what have we learned? Of course, we learned that we either need to do process confirmation after 2 months, or we simply just do retraining after 2 months. Process confirmation is done by a leader. The retraining is done by one of the employees. So in that sense, we can balance how we put focus on things. Instead of going out and doing problem solving, we can do proactive problem solving by doing training or process confirmation to re-emphasize a process or a step. So that's part of it. That's part of it. So this was kind of a light introduction. And I promised Ben that we'll have time here, so some Q&A. And I'm hoping for a lot of good questions and dialogue. So let's see. Yeah.
And John, thank you very much. A great overview as well. And hopefully we'll spark some questions. See, there's a couple going, but maybe it's another presentation. I just wondered if you have a slide that shows the programs and how they kind of fit together. I think I've seen one of those recently, but I guess I asked that because I'm speaking on behalf of the audience. It's nice when you see it and you get it. Okay, for training, I know I'm going to need a better way of doing that. For relating to my team members and having my supervisors have that approach, yep, I get that for job relations. But I guess the question would be, how does it fit in if we have companies that are already doing lean elsewhere? They got visual boards, they've got huddle meetings, they've got improvements going, and okay, well, how do we make this part of our lean system or our whatever system? So I guess how would you answer that question and maybe demonstrate that?
Yeah. So if you already are doing process improvements, let's say you've done a Kaizen and you've written down the standard and you want to implement it. So I can come with a case I've seen in a company where it was a molding area and they spent a lot of money on improving the changeover process. I mean, really a lot of money on that. Then 1 year later, we came out and did process confirmation on that, and nobody was following the new standard, not even the people in the project. They thought it was only a project, right? So what happened was there was no time for training, so they sent out an email with the SOPs on, and people had to read that and sign, I read and do, right? Then we went in and we did the job instruction training on that. And we did the job relation on creating motivation. So now people found out they had to follow it, and they also could follow it. Because most of our people, they cannot read and do. I mean, if you read something and you can maybe remember 10%, and how much can you then do? If you see something, you can maybe remember 20% of that. So I would say most companies, they look for job instruction, job relation at the beginning to create that stabilization. How do I get my process improvement to work every day? Because if I do a Kaizen and we only follow for 2 weeks, or maybe only 1 week, and then we go back and there's variation in the process, then I've lost everything I just invested. So this is what we call the roller coaster lean, that we have those events, it goes up and then it goes down. It goes up and goes down. And that's not the intent by PDCA. The PDCA thinking is first we SDCDA, meaning we stabilize before we improve. And if we don't stabilize, we don't know what people are doing, then what are we improving, right? So without standards, there can be no improvement. So that's the whole thinking behind here, that first you need to stabilize. That is job instruction, job relations, if it's unstable. So that's kind of the connection here. I would say job method, job instruction is you improve something, then you implement it, right? Job instruction, job relations is kind of treat the people good, so they want to follow your instructions. We know that fellowship is 80% the relations and 20% the method. That we know by fact. So if I have a bad relationship with my people, of course I get poor results. If I have good relations, I get good results. So there are a lot of, you can say, links between them. So the way we train them is one by one. So we learn each program at a time. But a good effective supervisor uses them as a dance. So that's kind of how they all link together. And of course, if we don't do job relations when we do improvements, we're not involving the right people, we're not listening to people's input. So that's kind of also part of the blame game we have in Lean, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
I've got other questions, but let's open the floor up too and hear from the group here. I'm just checking our Q&A, so if you want to pop your question there, that'd be great. The first one we can answer easily. Will the PowerPoint slides be shared via email? I would say yes, and then also the recording will have that. So that's an easy one to start with. But any specific questions for John on practical job instruction, job relations?
I was just going to say that's quite interesting. I'm thinking we've got standards, but they're hidden somewhere on a computer. The fact that you're wearing your standards around your neck, I think that could be a really great improvement because it's easy to find. I mean, even if they were hanging on a peg somewhere, you would be able to more easily into it, and then they would be more standardized. Because everybody who wants to write a new system or new standard, it's in a different format. So yeah, I'm a bit wary of wearing my instructions around my neck, but it just, the more I'm exposed to it, the more I'm thinking that is, it's a no-brainer. That's where it should be.
Yeah.
So thanks for that.
You're welcome. So this is actually pretty cool. We had, because this is the leader standards, right? This is the leader standard, right? Or the supervisor standards, I should say. So I had an MD at a medical company wearing this around his neck, the yellow card. So what it was in all the meetings, he just looked at it. So we have the whole story, which is kind of a subline. Are we jumping to conclusion in this meeting? Are we passing the buck? Or did our action help production, right? So he was using it to guide the people in their thinking always. And the same goes for the trainers. If I can train a person by following a standard and show that's being professional, if I'm proud of that, then the workers will also become proud of following standards on the job. So we're talking about culture here. Everything's culture, what we do here.
I just want to weigh in on that as well, John. We had a good discussion with this group before your presentation around themes that we would put on a billboard for people trying Lean.
Yeah.
And the one that was quite good from John here was that picture of a cart with square wheels. And somebody says, why don't you change the wheels and put round wheels on there? Say, oh, we're too busy. So we can't do that. And I look at TWI as a perfect example of that, where you can look at it on the surface and say, oh, that sounds great. I'm sure these large companies can invest in it and spend the time. But that is their real power. If you can stop and sharpen your axe before you keep chopping down the tree to say, we're going to train in a uniform, standardized way, we're going to relate to people in a standardized, uniform way, it just makes it that much more approachable. And I think the example I'll quickly give, Toyota introduced a global method of solving problems called TPP back in the early 2000s. And they sent out a similar little blue book to everybody in the world, tens of thousands of people, with this is the approach that we are going to follow and commit to following for how we identify problems. And some of the managers, especially the Americans, if I'm honest, push back and say, don't tell me how to do this. This is why you pay me. And I know how to solve a problem. Give me a break. I don't need to follow what you got in this little elementary book. And that the feedback was, well, if you don't follow the standard, you can't teach the standard. If you can't teach a standard, then what are you actually doing here? Because that's your job, to teach the standard to your team. And I look at TWI as a very similar thing. Is we have a well-distilled standard. Harvard Business School, whoever else, all the best psychologists in the world tell us this is the best distilled way of doing these things in your workplace. And if you're telling us you're not going to follow that, I was like, well, who do you think you are? Like, come on, let's stick to the basics here. So it is really powerful with that. When you follow a simple standard that seems so simple, but it really is powerful.
It's kind of creating the basic thinking of everything. So more advanced Lean tools, if you look at job method, how to improve a process, this is the most basic way of doing it. But if you're not learning this, you're not looking for the right things. So it's kind of the foundation before we add on to it. Job relations, the same. It's the most basic leadership thing. If you're not learned or thinking, before I did the job, now I need to work through my people. So how do I motivate my people to do it instead of me? That's job relations, right? And learning to do that process. For job relations, you can easily add on other leadership tools like type indicators or situation leadership on top of that. But it's still the foundation is that foundation practical leadership. Job instruction, the same. It's a very basic way of doing training. And at LIA, they still do that. That they pick the trainers, they train them according to TWI, 100% according to standard. Then they practice the method for 10 times before they go for a process confirmation to prove they can actually teach good. And then they're allowed to teach. But they also add on more advanced tools for some of their trainers. You have mentorship and so on. They need to learn that. You need to learn to teach in classroom and so on. But it's the most basic thing. And that's why I love about TWI is that it teaches that basic human elements of how do we lead, how do we improve, and how do we train. And most companies just doing that is enough. And then some companies, they add on more advanced tools also, which is perfectly fine. But without the basic ones, it doesn't make sense.
John, we've got a good question here from Morn, and it's how would you tackle a business that is already operating, but have many processes that need to be standardized first? So where and how would you start? And with the approach, would having a dedicated trainer / standard writer be ideal?
That was some good questions. I would start with problem solving. I would look at where is there variation, the biggest bug for the, you could say, where to get the most out of it. Like in the postal service, they had a lot of jobs, but we started with kind of sorting the packages, checking the numbers right, making sure I put it into the right containers. And the second job, how do I then place it into the container? So I always start with small pilots where there is kind of the biggest pain on cost or poor quality. It can also be safety. It can also be efficiency if there's variation on the time. Start small. Most important is that you first learn to get the fellowship in place. So let's say you do job instruction, job relations. One thing is that you get the standard. And that's where I see many companies fail is say, we want to do standards. And then you just hire a person to sit and do the technical work, write all the standards, but we're not adding value because nobody follows them. It's not value adding work. The first time evaluating is when people follow the standard. And that's the most difficult part to learn as a supervisor. So my recommendation is start with few standards, few problems, start small, and learn how to get people wanting to follow the standard. Once you learn that and you stabilize, let's say 5 1-minute jobs that has a high impact, then you can scale that pretty fast. But you need to learn that muscle, or your supervisors need to learn that muscle. How do I create fellowship? That's one thing. Another thing is I heard was ratio, right? I don't want to put in full-time trainers or full-time supervisors. For me, it's more like a playing coach, that I'm doing the work on the line and that I'm teaching somebody, or I'm improving the process, or I'm working on the relationship. Then we can talk about, is it maybe 20% of the time, or 15 or 30% of the time I'm in that supervisor role, and when am I actually doing the work? I'd rather look at that and then saying, instead of having full-time people doing it, because then you talk about few people, I'd rather have more people doing it. So it's maybe 1 for every 5 worker, or 1 to every 7 worker, because then I can have a small span of control, which means the supervisor gets a smaller job. If I need to take care of 30 people, I cannot do my every day talking to people, improving the relations. That's just too many relations to handle. If I'm down to 5, I can handle that relationship and I can make that flow work in the cell or with the 5 people I'm supervising. But again, I'm just doing it 20% of the time. The rest, I'm doing the operations. So that goes back to Toyota with talk about the team lead and the group lead. The team lead is that 1 to 5 person who's improving the process, making sure that everybody can do their job. We're proactive in our approaches and are working on the team culture. I'm probably also having a board meeting I'm running. So in that sense, that's the role of the team lead. The group lead is the formal leader. The team lead is an operator, also having some extra jobs.
John, I'll just add a little 2 cents onto this as well. So to that question of which ones do you look at first, which processes do you look at first? I guess my answer, some war wounds here. You have your list of proactive of these are the ones where we're having the most variation, the most issues, the whatever defects coming off of it. So you work on those in a nice sequential manner. You might say to your team, we need to work on this 3 per week or 1 per week to get started just to build some momentum. And unfortunately, a company I'm working in, I wasn't there when it happened, but we had an operator that lost a finger on a palletizer machine, and they were following their process, but we hadn't done the right job and shown them respect to train them in what was the best process. And that was because we rushed to get them onto the line. And so that was a really humbling experience. But the reality was that prompted the team to go out and say, let's get everybody across all 3 shifts and figure out what's our best way. Let's do a breakdown on how we run this machine in an appropriate, safe manner. And then that gave us a nice work breakdown sheet that came after it. Now this is the way we train to keep our people safe moving forward. So that was on the reactive column of our way that we approached it. But one less proactive, one less reactive. Hopefully you limit those reactive column elements. And then with that too, just on that second piece of having a dedicated trainer/writer, I think it's nice only if they act as an augmenting function. They can't be the dependent resource. It can't be, oh, that person does all of our standards, so they'll take care of it. If it's, hey, we've got our team together that's working in real time, they're having dialogue, and we have somebody that's taking good notes and gives us a nice draft to work on from there, that's augmenting the process. It's not causing a dependency to occur. That's my input on that.
Yeah.
Okay, next question from Maurice was, do you struggle to get senior leaders to buy into investing into such a rigorous standardization program? Do senior leaders tend to not oversimplify standardization?
I would say yes and no. Yes and no. The ones we get in, and you actually saw that, Ben, we did that workshop, the one-day workshop after the summit, right? As soon as they get insights, so my learning is if you learn about the method and you are part of that process of co-developing. So like you saw in the beginning, we always start with a senior management training. That's a 3 days training where they go through the basic training, they learn the method, and they see actually hands-on, why are we struggling today? Why do we have mistakes today? And they start to realize, okay, we have not built a good enough training. So nobody, to be honest, I know this is a lean community, so I can say this, hopefully not hurting anybody, but nobody likes standardization. Nobody likes standards. And personally, I hate it. But I do like good training, treating people good, learning a smart way of doing it, learning from each other, right? So Lego, we didn't talk about standardization. Of course, I'm also a lean consultant, so I had that in my back head. But when we went out and communicated, we said we want to do the best training. We want to onboard people in the best way. We want to make sure that our turnover doesn't go up because we're not treating people good. So who would like to be a good trainer? Who would like to go for training education? And many people said, yes, we would like to help that, because when I was trained, I was not trained proper. So I made mistakes. I don't want my next colleague to make mistakes. So we can say standardization is a means to the objective. And I'd rather talk about the objective, about the culture and what we get out of it. But the standard is a small part of it. So in that sense, we need to understand what's in it for me. And same goes if you talk about leader standard work. Most leaders will not also puke almost, because they're not standard, they're not robots. But as soon as they understand, okay, if I have leadership of a recipe, then we can talk together. I can knowledge share, and I can share with other people. Then I can actually learn in that process. Then it becomes more interesting for the following standard. So I think that's where we have to learn in our language when we're together as lean consultants or lean group thinkers. We can talk about that, but then on the other side, we need to think about how do we then communicate inside the organization. And for me, that's two different things. Yeah. One note to that with a supervisor, we need to be very careful who we pick, because when you're creating the standards, we want to involve people. So sometimes, or most times, it's not the best worker who's more motivated about doing the job correctly and fast or safely. It's maybe the person who is not 100% that person, but is more interested about helping people, facilitating, listening, observing, understanding. So if we pick the wrong supervisors, we get a culture of firefighting, because the ones who is more motivated about doing the job can very easily step on people's toes. But the other one who's maybe a little bit holding back, more observing, more asking questions, more thinking, more respectful, you get a different culture in the front line. So picking those trainers are key. I think it was General Eisenhower who once said the sergeant is the army. And that's kind of that role, the person who is training people and treating people. So most times the leader says, good morning, and this is your trainer. He's going to train you for the next 2 weeks. And then the leader leaves. So that trainer, whatever they say, will be the culture, right? So picking that person and ensuring they say the right thing is kind of key for success in the long run. Yeah.
Nice.
Good.
Another question here from Shakila. So yeah, and mindful of time, guys, we are into the Q&A. If you need to head off, that's perfectly fine. So feel free to drop off, but otherwise we'll answer some good questions here. So Shakila's question is it HR's responsibility to facilitate training and development within an organization, or is it the specific department's accountability to propose training and development for their team members?
I would say as a leader, you're responsible for your people. So if something happens to your people on safety, it's the leader who's responsible. So in my point of view, it's always the leader who's responsible for the people, also their skill development, where HR or training department or lean department can coach and support them, so that create that fail better and faster, right? But we cannot take away the leadership responsibility that they're responsible for their people, and should not take that away. But we can enable them so they can do a better job.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I'll add the comment too. I mean, the standard I've heard is that HR should not be the dependent function for getting training done. You want your teams to be autonomous to the extent, like we saw in that training plan, to know where we have deficiencies, where we have to look forward into the future. Somebody's going away, we're hiring somebody new. So to have the team be fully proficient in performing their own training is a best-in-class function. So that's the role of supervisor. And then HR can support that and come up with ways to say, how can we help you? And can we get you better trained resources and bring somebody in from the outside maybe? So they're serving more of that role.
Yeah, but the operations is operations. So
Yeah.
have you talked about TPM in the lean circle here about maintenance?
Yeah, I think everybody's probably heard it or used it in some form, but I guess make a link for us here, John.
So one of the things that most companies, they're very good at doing maintenance, or at some level. They plan the maintenance time right. That's to maintain the machines so we don't have variation in the machines, right? Plan stop and all that, unplanned stop. So how about planning our time with our people, making sure that the people are trained proper? So that's also because most organizations says that people are the most important assets we have. So we have time to plan the maintenance of our machines, but we don't have time to be with our people doing leadership, train the people proper, and so on as a leader, right? And that's why sometimes we work with organizations, right, that it becomes more of a facade or lean journey than actually about the people.
Yeah. Just one thing that popped in my head, John, too, is on the teams. The origin of this was wartime, and there wasn't a direct correlation of the Army and the manufacturing side, but the Department of War came up with this. So it was a war-driven initiative for these TWI programs. And I guess I say that because the leader's responsibility is to think that you are fighting a war in your business, in your department, and thankfully you might not have bullets flying at you, but you've got realities of keeping a business going and keeping it alive. So I think it's first adopting that mindset and then thinking that these are your tools in order to keep your team healthy, strong, reliable, fully functioning. I think that's even more the power when we look at these programs and how they tie in, and that brings in maintenance and brings in all these support functions. That it's all interrelated. It's the way that we're going about doing the work. So.
But that also reminds me, Ben, because in the 1940s there was that problem. You can say they had a gun to their head, which they literally had, because most men went to war in Europe, right, from US. Which means the ones left, they had a brother who was in the war, they had a father in war, or somebody else related that was in the war, right? So of course they wanted to help that, which makes the change process different, right? There was a different motivation. And that's why we use so much time with the senior management team in understanding why are we having this problem. So we're actually normally doing an A3 on why they should implement job instruction or job relations or job method. So on the left side of the A3, we're having them fill out what problems do they see. It can be high turnover, it can be long onboarding, it can be variation on different processes, and so on. Safety issues. But being very specific on what is the business case here, because if there's no problem, we shouldn't implement job instruction. If there's no problem, we shouldn't implement job relation, and the same goes for job method. So having them see that so clearly that the system is not providing the right solutions. So we need to update and improve the people system. That's where we get the buy-in from the senior management team. Most companies, they have kind of a cost of poor quality list. And if that's high, and we know that maybe 80% of that comes from human errors, then it's pretty easy to look at there's something wrong in the system. So that's your burning platform, and that's how we get the senior management involved. It's kind of show me the bug, and if we can't improve anything or there's no problem, then we shouldn't change it, right?
Yeah. Very good, John. Well, I'm noticing some people dropping off here, so we've covered some good ground, and I think just another quick overview of some next steps. So the BTP website is a great resource, and I give you guys credit for keeping that current and giving a nice overview of each of the programs. So that's btp.dk. You see it there on the screen. Thanks, John, for having that up. And BTP is a great partner of ours with the Lean Institute here locally, and very fortunate to work with that team. And then also we mentioned that we're doing a basic training for job instruction coming up in February. So that'll be hosted in Cape Town at Green Thread Manufacturers. They make some great leisure wear, casual wear, part of the Cape Union Mart group. and that they are hosting for their top line managers and their frontline managers as well, 3 days of basic instruction or basic training for job instruction. So if you'd like to join us for that, we're happy to consider it. So reach out to me on email. Otherwise, if you'd like to think about it for your company, by all means, we want to have that dialogue with you too, because we see in other parts of the world. My heart with this is that you see how powerful it is in these other, I won't say developed economies, because
Sorry, I'm on his case.
but the heart is, how do we get that going here locally in Africa? Because it really is a people-driven toolkit, and we have a people-heavy workforce. So let's put it to use for us. Very good. Well, thank you, John, for joining. Appreciate the time. Thank you, everybody else, for your time as well. We'll send out the slides. We'll post the recording and email it through to everybody likewise.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a
John.
nice
Bye.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Mabel came in a bit late.